My mother apologized to everyone. She apologized to waiters when they brought the wrong order. She apologized to neighbors if our tree dropped leaves into their yard. She apologized to telemarketers before hanging up. She even apologized to our dog after accidentally stepping on his tail. "I'm sorry" was probably the sentence I heard most growing up. Just never directed at me, not once. I noticed it when I was about 8 years old. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Kids don't usually keep track of things like that. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. One Saturday morning, Mom was carrying a stack of dishes into the kitchen when one of my sister Sarah's favorite mugs slipped out of her hands. It shattered across the tile floor. Sarah came running in. "My mug!" Mom immediately knelt beside her. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I know how much you love that one." She hugged Sarah before cleaning up the pieces. An hour later, Dad accidentally backed into the trash cans while pulling out of the driveway. Mom laughed. "I should have moved them sooner. Sorry." That afternoon, our elderly neighbor knocked on the door because one of our sprinklers had soaked part of his driveway. Mom apologized 3 times before he'd even finished explaining what happened. She was that kind of person. If she thought she'd inconvenienced someone by even a tiny amount, she said she was sorry. It wasn't weakness, it was just who she was, which made one particular afternoon impossible for me to understand. I'd spent almost an entire year collecting baseball cards, nothing expensive, mostly cards I'd traded for at school or bought with birthday money. I kept them in a blue plastic binder under my bed. Every page was organized, every player sorted by team. To an 8-year-old, it was a treasure. One Saturday, I came home from a friend's house and couldn't find it. I searched my room twice, then 3 times. Finally, I asked Mom, "Have you seen my card binder?" She froze for half a second. "Oh, I thought it was old schoolwork." I stared at her. "What?" "I cleaned your room." My stomach dropped. I threw it away. For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. "You, what?" I didn't realize. She looked genuinely surprised. "I thought it was just papers." I ran outside. The garbage truck had already come. I remember standing at the end of the driveway, staring at an empty trash can, as if looking hard enough would somehow bring it back. When I walked inside, Mom was waiting in the kitchen. I expected the words I'd heard her say hundreds of times. "I'm sorry." Instead, she smiled gently. "We'll start a new collection." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just, "We'll start a new collection." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. That night, I lay in bed thinking about it. Maybe she'd forgotten. Adults forgot things. The next morning, I walked downstairs expecting her to mention it. She didn't. She made pancakes, asked if I wanted syrup, talked about the weather. The baseball cards never came up again. A few months later, she forgot to pick me up after soccer practice. Practice ended at 4. By 5, every other kid had gone home. The coach sat with me on a bench outside the field. He kept checking his watch. "You want me to call your parents again?" "I already did." "No answer?" I shook my head. At nearly 6 o'clock, Mom's car finally pulled into the parking lot. She jumped out, looking flustered. "Ethan." I climbed into the passenger seat. She started driving before either of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I completely lost track of time. I waited. Nothing. "No, I'm sorry." Just silence. When we got home, Dad asked why we'd been so late. Before I could answer, Mom said, "I mixed up the schedule." Dad shrugged. "It happens." Then he looked at me. "You okay, buddy?" I nodded. "Yeah." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed trying to remember every time I'd ever heard Mom apologize to someone. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Then I tried to remember a single time she'd apologized to me. I couldn't think of one, not even once. It became a game after that. Not one I enjoyed, just one I couldn't stop playing. Every time something happened, I waited. If she burned Dad's toast, "I'm sorry." If she interrupted Sarah, "Sorry, go ahead." If she bumped into someone at the grocery store, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Then something would happen with me. She'd interrupt me, forget something important, raise her voice when she misunderstood what I'd said. And every single time, there was no apology. By the time I was 12, I'd convinced myself there had to be a reason. Maybe she thought I didn't deserve one. Maybe she thought mothers didn't have to apologize to their sons. Or maybe she simply believed she was never wrong when it came to me. I didn't know which answer hurt more. He was wrong. Mothers did apologize to their sons. I just didn't know that yet. The first time someone else pointed it out, I was 13. Sarah and I were helping Mom carry groceries into the house when one of the paper bags split open. A carton of eggs exploded across the driveway. Mom sighed. "Oh no." Sarah laughed. Mom, seriously? Mom smiled sheepishly. I'm sorry, I should have double-bagged it. I was carrying the last 2 bags toward the kitchen when one of them slipped from my hands. A jar of pasta sauce shattered across the floor. Before I could even react, Mom's voice echoed through the room. Ethan, I froze. What? You have to pay attention. I didn't mean, glass is everywhere. I know. You could have gotten hurt. She spent the next 5 minutes explaining how careless I'd been. Not yelling, not screaming, just disappointed. When everything was cleaned up, Sarah quietly walked beside me upstairs. You okay? Yeah, she hesitated. You know, what? I think she was harder on you because you're older. I laughed. I'm 14 months older. Still, I wanted to believe her. I really did. High school only made me notice it more. Mom had become famous among my friends, not because she was strict, because she was unbelievably polite. If one of my friends came over after school, she'd apologize if dinner wasn't ready yet. If she burned cookies, I'm sorry. If she accidentally interrupted a conversation, sorry, keep going. One afternoon, my best friend Josh was sitting in our kitchen doing homework when Mom accidentally knocked over his soda. It spilled across the table. Oh my gosh. She grabbed paper towels. I'm so sorry. Josh laughed. It's just Coke. No, I should have been more careful. She apologized 3 more times. After she walked away, Josh looked at me. Your mom says sorry more than anyone I've ever met. Yeah, kind of adorable. I stared down at my math book. I've never heard her say it to me. He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. He frowned. Never? Never. Josh laughed. Come on, I'm serious. No way. You've been coming here for 4 years. Have you ever heard it? His smile slowly disappeared. He actually thought about it for almost a minute. Then he quietly said, That's weird. It was the first time someone else confirmed I wasn't imagining it. After that, Josh started noticing too. Sometimes he'd catch my eye after Mom apologized to someone. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. We were both thinking the same thing. The biggest fight happened when I was 16. Dad's watch disappeared. It wasn't an expensive watch, just the one his father had given him before he passed away. Everyone searched the house. Mom asked if I'd borrowed it. I haven't. Are you sure? Yes. You didn't move it? No, she sighed. It doesn't just disappear. For some reason, she became convinced I'd taken it, not to steal it, just because I had a habit of borrowing Dad's tools without asking. For 2 days she kept bringing it up. Ethan, if you misplaced it, just tell us. I didn't. We're not angry. I don't have it. She looked genuinely disappointed. That hurt more than if she'd yelled. On the 3rd day, Sarah found the watch. It had slipped behind a drawer in my parents' bedroom. Dad laughed. So that's where it went. Sarah held it up. Ethan was telling the truth. Mom looked at me, then at the watch, then back at me. For one long second, I thought this would finally be it. I could almost hear the words forming. I'm sorry. Instead, she simply nodded. I guess we know now. That was all. No apology, no acknowledgement that she'd accused me over and over again. Just, I guess we know now. Something inside me finally snapped. You couldn't even say it. The room went quiet. Mom blinked. Say what? You know what? She looked genuinely confused. I don't. You never apologized to me. Dad slowly looked up from the table. Sarah stopped moving completely. I kept going before anyone could interrupt. You apologize to strangers. You apologize if someone bumps into you. You apologize to Josh because you spilled his drink. My voice cracked. But you've never apologized to me. Not once. I've been keeping track since I was 8. Nobody spoke. Mom stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not defensive, almost heartbroken. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Finally, she said quietly, I didn't know you felt that way. I laughed. You don't even hear yourself. She took one step toward me. Ethan, for the first time in my life. It looked like she was about to say the words I'd waited years to hear. Instead, she lowered her eyes and whispered something that made even less sense. Some things are more complicated than they look. Then she walked upstairs. Dad sat there in complete silence. A minute later, he quietly said, Give her some time. I looked at him in disbelief. Time for what? He didn't answer. Neither did I. But that night, lying awake in bed, I realized something that hurt even more than before. She hadn't forgotten to apologize. She had chosen not to. And somehow, That was worse. College should have made it easier. People always say distance helps, that once you move out, old family patterns start to fade. For us, they didn't. If anything, they became easier to see. I was 19 when I left for college 3 hours away. Mom hugged me for almost a full minute before I drove off. Call me when you get there. I will. And don't forget to eat actual meals. I smiled. I know. She kissed my forehead. Drive safely. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. She was still standing in the driveway, waving, smiling, looking exactly like every mother sending her son off into the world. For a while, things were good. We talked every Sunday. She'd ask about classes, my roommates, whether I was sleeping enough. Sometimes she'd send me care packages filled with homemade cookies, socks, and little handwritten notes. Most of the notes ended the same way. Love you more than you know. I kept every single one, because despite everything, I never doubted she loved me. That was what made the apology thing so confusing. Love was never missing. Something else was. During my sophomore year, I came home for Thanksgiving. Sarah was already there. Josh came over that evening too. He and Sarah had started dating a few months earlier, which meant my best friend had somehow become part of the family. Dinner was loud. Dad told the same hunting story he'd told every Thanksgiving for 10 years. Sarah rolled her eyes at all the familiar parts. Mom burned the dinner rolls. She laughed. Sorry, everyone. Dad grinned. They're only a little crispy. Josh reached for one anyway. They're good. She smiled. You're lying, but thank you. Everyone laughed. Later that night, Dad asked me to help him carry boxes down into the basement. One of them slipped from my hands. It landed hard enough to crack an old ceramic lamp that had belonged to my grandmother. The room went silent. I stared at the broken pieces. I'm sorry, Dad. The words came out before I even thought about them. Dad looked at the lamp, then at me. It's just a lamp. I should have been more careful. He shrugged. I've broken plenty of things. Mom appeared at the basement door after hearing the noise. What happened? Dad answered before I could. The lamp finally lost its fight with gravity. Mom looked at the shattered pieces. Then she looked at me. For a split second, I saw the familiar expression, the one she'd worn all my life whenever I made a mistake. Disappointment. She opened her mouth. I waited. Not for forgiveness, for the same lecture I'd heard 100 times. Instead, she simply said, "We'll clean it up." No apology, no reassurance, nothing. Josh was standing just behind her. As everyone walked back upstairs, he quietly stayed behind. You okay? I nodded. It's weird, isn't it? What is? She still didn't say it. I looked at him. You noticed? I always notice. He hesitated. Ethan, I don't think she's doing it because she doesn't love you. I laughed quietly. Then why? He shook his head. I don't know. But whatever the reason is, it's eating her alive too. Those words stayed with me, because I'd spent years thinking I was the only one carrying this. I'd never considered. Maybe she was carrying it too. After graduation, I moved back home for 6 months while saving for an apartment. Being under the same roof again felt strange. We got along well, almost too well. We never fought anymore. It was as if we'd silently agreed to avoid the subject altogether. Then one rainy Saturday morning, it happened again. Mom asked me to help move some boxes into the attic. One of them slipped. A photo album hit the floor. Several old pictures scattered everywhere. She hurried over. Oh no! We both knelt to gather them. One photograph had bent nearly in half. It was from my 8th birthday, the year I'd lost my baseball cards. I stared at it. 8-year-old me stood between Mom and Dad, smiling with a birthday cake in front of me. Mom noticed what I was looking at. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Finally I asked, almost without thinking, "Do you remember that year?" She nodded. Her hands stopped moving. I know. You never apologized. Silence. Rain tapped softly against the roof. She closed the photo album, looked at it, then looked at me. Her lips parted. I knew this was finally going to be the moment. 20 years of waiting. One sentence. 2 simple words. Instead, she reached over, placed her hand gently on mine, and quietly said, "I've thought about that day more times than you could ever imagine." Then she stood up, carried the photo album downstairs, and left me sitting alone in the attic. I watched her disappear through the doorway, for the second time in my life. She had walked away when the apology was right there, and I no longer knew which hurt more, the silence or the fact that she seemed to believe I would understand it one day. A year later, Mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It wasn't advanced, at least that's what the doctors kept saying. Very early, manageable. She'll have many good years. Everyone focused on those words. Many good years. I did too. At first, the medications helped. Most days, you couldn't even tell anything had changed, but little things started appearing. Her handwriting became shakier. She moved more slowly. She stopped carrying full coffee mugs because she was afraid she'd spill them. One afternoon, she laughed after dropping a spoon onto the kitchen floor. "I guess my hands have opinions now." Dad laughed with her. So did I. She always had a way of making difficult things feel smaller. Over the next few years, I visited almost every weekend. Sometimes we'd sit on the back porch for hours. She'd ask about work. I'd ask about her physical therapy. We never ran out of things to talk about. Except one thing. Neither of us ever mentioned apologies again. It became the only subject that didn't exist. Then one Sunday afternoon, something happened that brought it all rushing back. Mom was making tea. As she reached for a cup, her hand shook. The cup slipped. It shattered across the kitchen floor. Before either Dad or I could move, she looked at us and smiled weakly. "I'm sorry," Dad immediately answered. "It wasn't your fault." She still shook her head. "I'm sorry." She apologized 3 more times while we cleaned up. I watched her, then looked at the broken pieces on the floor. The memory hit me so hard it almost made me dizzy. The baseball cards, the shattered pasta sauce jar, the photo album, every moment I'd spent waiting. She apologized to a broken coffee cup. Still, never to me. That winter, her health declined much faster than anyone expected. Dad stopped leaving her alone. Sarah started coming over every Tuesday. I came every Friday after work and stayed through the weekend. One evening, I found Mom sitting alone in the living room. The television was on. She wasn't watching it. She was looking through an old photo album. I recognized it immediately. The same one we dropped in the attic years earlier. She smiled when she saw me. "Come sit." I did. She slowly turned another page. There was the picture from my 8th birthday again. I laughed quietly. "You really love this album." "I do." She brushed her fingers across the photograph. "You were such a happy little boy. Weren't most kids?" She smiled. "Not like you." For several minutes, we simply turned pages together. Then she stopped on a picture from my high school graduation. Without looking at me, she quietly asked, "Do you still think about it?" I knew exactly what she meant. "I try not to." She nodded. "I do. Every day." My heart started pounding. This was it. I could feel it. She closed the album, turned toward me. There were tears in her eyes. She took a slow breath. "Ethan." I waited. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her lips trembled. Then she looked away. "I'm tired." That was all. She stood up slowly and walked toward her bedroom. I watched her disappear down the hallway. For a moment, I almost followed her. Almost. Instead, I stayed on the couch, staring at the closed photo album. I couldn't decide which possibility hurt more, that she still couldn't say the words, or that something inside her physically wouldn't let her. She passed away 9 months later, peacefully. Dad called me just after sunrise. I don't remember the drive to my parents' house, only walking through the front door, only seeing Sarah crying into Josh's shoulder, only seeing Mom's favorite chair sitting empty by the window. The funeral was small, exactly the way she'd wanted. Family, a few neighbors, friends from church. After everyone left, Dad and I stayed behind to gather flowers and photographs. As we carried boxes back into the house, he suddenly stopped in front of the hallway closet. I almost forgot. He reached onto the top shelf and pulled down a small cardboard box. "I think these are yours." Inside were old birthday cards, school drawings, little things she'd saved over the years. At the bottom, there was a worn leather notebook. I recognized it immediately. Mom's journal. Dad looked at it, then quietly said, "I've never read it." Neither had I. I held it in both hands for a long time without opening it. Somehow, it felt heavier than it should have, because deep down, I already knew what I was looking for. For a long time, I couldn't open it. The notebook sat on my kitchen table for almost 3 days. Every time I walked past it, I thought the same thing. Whatever's inside won't change anything. She was gone. Nothing written on those pages could bring her back. Nothing could make her say the words I'd spent my entire life waiting to hear. On the 4th evening, I finally made myself a cup of coffee, sat down, opened the cover. The first pages weren't surprising. Shopping lists, recipes, reminders to call relatives, notes about Dad's doctor's appointments, normal things. Then the entries became more personal. She wrote almost every night, never long, just enough to empty her thoughts before bed. I started reading, not looking for anything specific, until one date made me stop. June 14th, the day she'd thrown away my baseball cards. I felt my chest tighten. The entry wasn't even half a page. Cleaned Ethan's room today. Made the biggest mistake I've made in years. Threw away something he loved because I didn't stop to ask. I waited. Surely the next sentence would finally say it. It didn't. Instead it read, "He tried so hard not to cry. That somehow made it worse." I turned the page. Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. I kept reading. Months passed. Then I reached another date. The afternoon she'd forgotten me after soccer practice. Coach stayed with Ethan. I saw him pretending he wasn't scared when I finally arrived. Again. "No, I'm sorry. Only guilt." I frowned. Every story was the same. She described what she'd done. She described how awful she felt. Then, nothing. Almost as if every entry stopped just before the part I'd been waiting for. Hours passed before I realized something. Every time she'd written about Sarah, the entry ended differently. Forgot Sarah's recital. I apologized. Another. Raised my voice at Jim. Told him I was sorry. Another. Was unfair to my sister today. Called her tonight to apologize. Every single time. Except when the entry was about me. Never once. Not a single time. I closed the notebook. I almost laughed. Even her private journal refused to explain it. The answer came 2 pages later. There wasn't a date at the top. Just a title. About Ethan. The handwriting looked different. Slower. Like she'd rewritten it several times. I started reading. Ethan asked me again today why I've never apologized to him. I remembered the conversation instantly. I'd been 16. The watch. The argument. The sentence I'd never forgotten. "Some things are more complicated than they look," she continued. I almost answered. I almost finally said it. Instead, I watched him walk upstairs believing I didn't care. I felt my throat tighten. The next paragraph was crossed out, then rewritten underneath. Every apology asks someone for something. It asks for mercy. It asks for forgiveness. I kept reading. Ethan never waits to be asked. He forgives me before I deserve it. My hands began to shake. She had noticed. Every single time, she'd noticed. She wrote, "When I ruined his baseball cards, he still hugged me before bed. When I forgot him after soccer, he still kissed my forehead and said goodnight. When I accused him of taking Jim's watch, he still shoveled the driveway for me the next morning." I stopped reading. Those weren't big moments to me anymore. I'd forgotten most of them. She hadn't. She remembered every single one. I turned the page. There was only one paragraph left, and halfway through it, I finally found the 2 words I'd waited 28 years to read. "I'm sorry, Ethan." My vision blurred, not because she'd finally written them, because of what came next. I should have said them out loud. Every single time. But after the first few years, I became ashamed that I hadn't. Then every missed apology became another reason not to speak. The silence grew larger than the mistake, and I kept telling myself, "Next time, I'll say it next time." I sat there staring at the page. There had never been a grand secret. No hidden family tragedy. No lesson. No complicated psychological experiment. Just one missed apology. Then another. Then another, until saying it felt impossible. The words had become too heavy to carry, and she had carried them for the rest of her life. I didn't sleep that night. The journal stayed open on the kitchen table. Every time I walked past it, my eyes landed on the same sentence. The silence grew larger than the mistake. I kept thinking about how true that was. The baseball cards hadn't ruined our relationship. Forgetting soccer practice hadn't ruined it. The watch hadn't ruined it. None of those moments were big enough. What changed everything was that after each one, saying "I'm sorry" became just a little harder, until one day, it felt impossible. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing she didn't think I deserved an apology. The truth was almost harder to accept. She believed I deserved one every single time. She just couldn't bear admitting how long she'd waited. The next weekend, I drove to my parents' house. Dad was in the garage organizing old tools. He looked up when he saw me. "You finished it?" I nodded. He didn't ask what I'd read. Instead, he quietly closed the toolbox. "I always wondered if she'd leave that notebook for you." "You knew?" He smiled sadly. "I knew," she wrote. "I never asked what." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the funeral. "Why didn't you make her tell me?" Dad stared at the concrete floor for a long time. "I tried." "What happened?" "The first few years she'd always say," he closed his eyes, remembering, "Tomorrow. I'll tell him tomorrow." He sighed. Then tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. And after enough years, she convinced herself it was too late. I looked down at my hands. So everyone just let it happen? He shook his head. No, we watched it happen. There's a difference. I frowned. I don't understand. Dad leaned back in his chair. When people carry shame for long enough, they stop believing they're avoiding a conversation. They start believing they're protecting everyone from it. I thought about that. It sounded exactly like Mom. She wasn't avoiding 2 words anymore. She was avoiding reopening 20 years of hurt. Except, the hurt had never closed. A month later, Sarah called. I found something. What? You should come over. She was cleaning out the last few boxes from Mom's sewing room. When I arrived, she held up an old birthday card. It was addressed to me. Never mailed. Never given. My 21st birthday. Inside she'd written, "Happy birthday, Ethan." Then she'd crossed it out. Started over. Crossed that out too. The entire card was filled with unfinished sentences until the very bottom. There, in tiny handwriting squeezed into the corner, she'd written, "One day I'll be brave enough to tell you how sorry I am." The card had never left the drawer. Sarah quietly said, "I don't think she wanted anyone to see this." I nodded. I know. We stood there in silence. Then Sarah asked something I'd never expected. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. When we were kids, I was jealous of you." I looked at her in surprise. "Jealous?" She smiled through tears. "You were the one she worried about." "What?" "I used to think she loved you more." I almost laughed. "Sarah, I'm serious. She'd check on you every night after you fell asleep. She kept every drawing you ever made. If you looked sad for 5 minutes, she looked guilty for 5 days." I stared at her. "Then why?" Sarah finished the sentence for me. "Did she never apologize?" She slowly shook her head. "I don't think she knew anymore. I think she buried it so deeply, she forgot how to dig it back out." That evening, I drove to the cemetery alone. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different. I brought the journal and the birthday card. I sat on the grass for nearly an hour before saying anything. Finally, I smiled. A real smile. "Mom, I was wrong. I spent my whole life believing your silence meant I mattered less." I looked down at the notebook resting in my lap. It turns out, I mattered so much that every apology became heavier than the last. A breeze moved through the trees. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't angry. Sad, absolutely, but not angry, because forgiveness doesn't always begin when someone says they're sorry. Sometimes, it begins when you finally understand why they never could. I stood up, brushed the grass from my jeans, and before walking away, I quietly said the words she'd spent a lifetime trying to find. "It's okay, Mom. I forgive you." Then I smiled to myself, not because she'd finally apologized, but because I finally understood something I'd been too hurt to see. I spent 28 years believing I was the only person my mother never apologized to. The truth was, I was the only person she spent 28 years trying to apologize to. She just never found the courage to say the words before time ran out. And if there's one thing her silence taught me, it's that pride rarely destroys relationships. Shame does. So now, whenever I'm wrong, no matter how small it seems, I say the words immediately. Not because they erase the mistake, but because I've seen what happens when you wait until tomorrow. Sometimes, tomorrow never comes.